Everyone, welcome back to vcfo webinar series. This is the second one in our three-part series, and we're going to allow everybody a minute or so to sign in and get comfortable. And everyone, and welcome to the business case for rehabilitated retention strategies. We encourage your questions and comments and ask that you use the Q&A feature to share them with us. We'll answer as many questions as we can here. If there are more questions than we can answer in our allotted time, we'll follow up with answers sent to all of our attendees. My name is Paul Haggerty. My role at vcfo is Senior People Ops HR Consultant. That's a mouthful. My history in HR goes back 24 years through various industries and organizations. I've had a blast at every one of them. I've been both an employee and a consultant, and I have a partner now. Her name is Carly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carly Osgoby. I, too, am a senior HR consultant for the Denver, Colorado market with vcfo. I come to you with a decade of experience in human resources, just like Paul, in various industries. And my approach has always been that I wanted to be a strategic partner, and still do, to the organizations that I'm serving. Our next slide, we're going to talk about our company very briefly for those of you on the webinar who are new to vcfo, before we jump right into our two retention strategies that we're going to talk to you about today.
Yeah, at VCO, what we do is we make companies stronger. We do that through diagnosis and delivery of some game-changing resources. You can see more about it here on this slide that Carly referred to.
Yeah, so what are we? We're a professional services company, a B2B business model. Who are we? We are your CFOs, your controllers, and your human resource directors. What do? We do fractional work, project-based work, interim services, as well as mentoring. And why do we do that? We do it to make companies stronger.
Part one, we shared our thoughts and data about recruiting, specifically promoting from within and employee referral strategies. But now that we've got our people on board, we want to ensure that they want to stay with us. So let's talk about retention strategies. We've identified many strategies that have been proven to work when they're implemented correctly. And we selected two retention strategies that we'll focus on today: a proper culture fit and investing in career development. We look at definitions, components, and data, and metrics to gauge the success of the strategies, because these two have been noted in several studies as the prime strategies to use to drive employee retention.
Yeah, and every business leader I talk to in various industries are all facing the same challenges as it relates to labor shortages and the Great Resignation. Strong retention strategies are instrumental now more than ever before.
Okay. Before we dive into these two, a third strategy is worth mentioning, and that's to create a solid compensation philosophy and practice. Know what your industry and or market compensation status is. Are you tracking, or how are you tracking, pay equity? Be aware that your high-performing people who are underpaid or underappreciated are desirable targets for your competitors. We've seen that the standard 3 to 5% increase is just not competing with the draw of a 10, 25 plus salary bump that comes with a job or a company change. Let's go back to the important strategies for successful employee retention. We'll cover compensation in part 3. Number 1, ensure your hires are a good culture fit. And number 2, investing in employee career development. These two consistently appeared at the top of the lists in the studies we saw. Carly's going to introduce and take us through the importance of finding culture fit in recruiting and retention.
Yeah, culture fit is so important as it relates to retention, because the employees really do care about their work environment. They want to be part of a dynamic and supportive organization that stand for well-defined missions. It's crucial to find talent who believe in your organization's mission and who share those same attitudes and beliefs. So let's start with a quick quiz testing your knowledge. At what phase in the employee life cycle should you evaluate culture fit? Is it A, recruiting, B, onboarding, C, after 6 months, or D, 1 year? What do you think the best answer is? It's actually A, at the recruiting stage. So when you're interviewing a prospective employee, finding a good culture fit means finding someone who believes in your company's mission and shares a similar outlook and attitude as his or her potential colleagues that they'd be joining. But before you can hire for culture, you must be able to define what your workforce culture is. Once defined, you can drill into that during the interview process by asking specific and intentional behavioral type questions that will really give you the insight when you're the one on the interview panel based on the candidate's responses if they would be a good culture fit or not.
Speaking of culture fit, there's really two things we need to look at. One is what the workplace culture is. What are the accepted attitudes and behaviors of the collective employees within your organization? That's your culture. And then the culture fit is how will this new hire or person who's being promoted onto a different team, sometimes teams have cultures within a culture, the individual's attitudes, values, and beliefs, are they aligned with the core values and culture of the organization or even the team?
Right. And right below that, that recipe for success, I truly believe these 4 points shown below comprise of the top things you can do to ensure a strong workplace culture and culture fit. So starting with the first one, prioritizing onboarding and training. A new hire is already feeling vulnerable with a career change. You want to nurture them, make them feel welcome, and have a structured onboarding and training plan for at least the first 90 days. That'll help set them up for success with ongoing peer and manager check-ins. They'll feel supported and they really know how they are going to learn that new job that they got into within your organization. If they're onboarded poorly, it could make the employee question their choice of joining that organization, and it could lead to them leaving within 6 months or the first year, which we know how costly that is to organizations. And then on top of that, the uphill battle that creates in our current labor shortage environment that we're in. The next bullet, recognize and appreciate frequently. I'm going to get into this a little bit in more detail later, but employees want to work in an environment where they feel valued. Employee recognition efforts go a long way towards instilling those feelings of being valued. Next one, the human-centric approach, really taking the time to understand your people, what matters to them, what are their pain points. Really think about it this way, to retain me, you have to understand what matters to me. And then strong leadership. It's really that simple. Having better leaders in the workplace. Managers need to be better listeners, coaches, collaborators, because great managers help their colleagues learn and grow. They recognize their teams and peers for doing great work, and make them feel truly cared about. In environments like that, employees thrive.
Yeah, Carly, you're absolutely right. I think the strong leader is a very important part of that recipe for success because they are the ones who are going to prioritize that onboarding and training, as you mentioned. They're the ones who are frontline with the new employee or whoever we're talking about, who are going to recognize and appreciate the work that they're doing or coach them in situations where they need it. And they're the ones that are going to make that connection, and the human element is part of what the strong leader is going to provide. So I really think that recipe is complete when you put a strong leader in there.
So who does it well? Here is the gold standard of an organization that has a great workplace culture and culture fit. So I'm sure you've been aware of this. Every year, Fortune comes out with the 100 best companies to work for. And here's what success looks like for 2022. Cisco took the top spot. And if you look at their demographics, 32% of their workforce has been with Cisco for 6 to 15 years. That's a very long time. And even 6 years can double the national average of 3 years retained. So more than a third of their workforce has been with them for over 6 years. That's really impressive.
And again, for our friends who like visuals, the graph over to the right it shows the tenure of the folks at the company. And I think if you look way over to the right, as Carla mentioned, you're going to see employees that have been there over 20 years. 12%, I think, is the number. And that's high and unusual. But Cisco is doing something right in order to maintain that kind of tenure. They're also recognized as a great place to work. Not just I like my job, but this is a great place to work. 96% of their employees can honestly say that about Cisco. When you look at, we'll say typical companies, so average typical companies, the percentage there is about 57%. More than half of what Cisco is able to do. And so you can see that culture fit really, really does stand out when you do it right.
Some of the questions that they were asked where we're showing on the bottom that they're scoring 98 and 97%. I'm going to just talk about those statements and how it relates to those 4 topics or those 4 bullets that I just talked about in the recipe for success. So I can take time away from work when I need it. I'm proud to tell others I work here, and people care about each other here. When thinking about those recipes for success, that's a human-centric approach. The other questions, when you join the company, you're made to feel welcome. Clearly, they're doing something right with their onboarding and training process. And management is an honest and ethical in its business practice. Well, that's a reflection on strong leaders and strong leadership within an organization. So that really matters. And thinking about it from that perspective of those questions of, I'm proud to tell others I work here and people care about each other here, that matters to employees in an organization. And that helps drive retention. So next slide, I just pulled some information from Gallup, and I'm sure you've heard of Gallup before and all the great data and analytics that they release. So to be honest with you, I was very surprised to see some of these statistics on the right. This is the State of the Global Workforce report that they do. And really why I wanted to bring this up is because there are such strong ties to engagement here. So, the highlights and those kind of shocking things that I just mentioned, 21% of employees are engaged at work. That's a very low percentage for people who are truly engaged, truly passionate about what they're doing, 21%. How can we make that higher? Again, this is global, but still, that's a very low percentage. And then the other one, 45% of employees said now is a good time to find a job. So if almost half of your organization is thinking that, retention and those strategies are super important of how do we combat that thought. So really what I'm mentioning is there is a strong link between engagement and performance outcomes such as retention, and that engagement and well-being interact with each other in very powerful ways. So judging by this report, do employees find their work meaningful and rewarding? Do they think that their lives are going well? And do they feel hopeful about the future? Well, according to Gallup's report, the short answer is that most employees around the world would answer no.
Thanks, Carly. And you can see from Gallup that only 21% of surveyed employees are fully engaged at work. But what does engagement mean? And I thought of an analogy. Recall the last time that you checked in at a hotel and you walked up to the counter, and the person behind the counter was very pleasant, but it was kind of perfunctory or business. Hey, Mr. Haggerty, here's your key. Elevators are to the left. Have a nice day. And then the more engaged or engaged employee at customer service is the one that says, hey, Mr. Haggerty, we're so happy to have you back. We got your favorite room. Are you up for a Red Sox game tonight? We know how to get your tickets. And then that turn down service you requested last time, we have finally implemented that. Thanks for the idea. We're really happy to have you here. If there's anything we can do to make your stay better, let us know. Now, which one, in your opinion, would be more engaged? I'm going to lean on the guy who said Red Sox tickets. But I think I was just trying to paint a picture for you on what engagement looks like. And then the other statistic here, 45% of employees said now is a good time to find a job. We can reduce that through engagement, through culture fit, and through employee career development strategies. So that's what we're trying to do, is to stem that tide and then increase the 21 to something larger.
So some pro tips around culture fit. Point number 1, evaluate your leadership team's interpersonal skills. We remember back to the recipe for success, strong leadership is key. Anyone can be a manager, not everyone can be a leader. Now more than ever before, it's imperative for your leadership team to have strong interpersonal skills if you want to keep your talent. So where can you invest in their further development? Next pro tip, find out on an individual basis how people like to be recognized. For example, if someone on your team is very introverted, just a shy personality, they might prefer individual one-on-one recognition. And if you don't know that as their leader and you recognize their accomplishment in, let's say, an all company meeting where you stand up and you say, Joe, did this amazing work on this project, and it's very blindsiding to that person, they could be red as a tomato and you could unintendedly embarrass them because that's not the way they like to be recognized. So really what I'm trying to say here is find out if your employees have a preference on the way they like to be recognized. Are they okay with a huge group setting being recognized? Do they want that kind of public recognition? Or do they want individual one-on-one recognition and feedback? Find out, listen to them, and flex to their preference. It's important.
And Carly talked earlier about recruiting being the first step in culture fit. Then comes the onboarding. You need to have an effective 90-day onboarding plan. We recommend 90 days only because it gives the hires some connection and immersion by making them or including them in several activities, whether it's their own assignment or meeting people who they're going to be working with, but carry that connection through for the 90 days. And doing that, you'll show that you do prioritize culture and connection. That connection is what's important when it comes to culture. If you're disconnected, then you're disconnected from the employees, you're disconnected from the culture. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. And then lastly, invest in taking care of your employees and their families. Benefits, flexible schedules, those sorts of things where you can take care of both. And one way to take care of your employees is strategy number 2, which is to offer employee career development programs. A quick quiz about career development. What percentage of new employees quit their jobs after about 6 months in their role? Is it 17, maybe 29 or 33, or is it 47%? What do you think? Well, survey says 33%, 1/3 of those people that we're hiring are leaving after 6 months on average. Imagine that, all the time and expense of finding, hiring, onboarding, training, equipping, and compensating someone, and it ends up really being for nothing, and you have to start all over again. We can't afford to let this go on. And career development has been on the top of the list for employees in all the studies that we've seen. one survey found that 94% of those who left would have stayed at their current employer if the employer did invest in employees' long-term learning and growth. Here's some fun facts. Did you know, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 4.25 million people quit their jobs in January, 1 month, and that's up from 3 1/3 in 2021. In fact, every month for the last 11 months, more than 4 million Americans have quit their jobs. Context, in 2021, 47 million Americans quit their jobs. At the rate we're going right now, we're going to surpass that in 2022. Not a number, not a goal we want to achieve. According to the Society for Human Resources Management, or SHRM, more than 40% of U.S. workers are currently actively seeking another position, or they're thinking about it and plan to do it soon. We can curb that. Did you know that millennials, who, by the way, are the largest cohort in today's business economy, are more than twice as likely to quit as baby boomers like me? Gallup estimates the cost of replacing an employee ranges from 1/2 to twice their salary, their annual salary. And that's just in replacement costs, never mind the the aggravation and turmoil and churn caused by bad hiring. In fact, that amounts to $1 trillion lost by businesses every year due to voluntary turnover.
Yeah, these are staggering statistics and staggering costs. So if you didn't already think about retention being important to your organization's overall strategy, hopefully these will drive that point home for you today.
This is for folks who prefer visuals. In 2021, the leading avoidable causes of turnover, you see them listed here. And the biggest piece of the pie is that career and career development that employees are looking for. If we can close that gap, shrink that pie, we can keep our people longer. And just a note that for 2022, the data is out, but the pie chart's not. That number went from 18% up to 22%. So we are going in the wrong direction. And I think that what we can offer today will help us stem that tide as well. Let's talk about career development. What is it? It's making career movement within the company accessible and available to all employees who desire it.
Yeah, I think it's really important to focus on the all employees who desire it piece as well, because not everybody wants to grow and get promoted, and that's perfectly okay. I argue that you need a mix of both in your organization. For example, somebody who's sunsetting their career and, has plans to retire, in about 2 years, they might not want to grow and take on a new position with, more tasks and more demands and learning something new. Maybe on the last 2 years, they're really valuing that safety and security in that role, and they're very proficient at it, very, very well and expert in that role. I argue that they are two very valuable assets to an organization, and that you do need that mix of both.
Exactly. What we're going to talk about is that you need to build a strong, easily accessible training program and include leadership training in that. You want to conduct and act on employee engagement surveys. They can provide a lot of information. We want to conduct stay interviews and then look at the metrics associated with the career development, see how we're doing. All right, our key aspects of employee career development: to make training and career development available, easily accessible, and measurable. This is one of the top reasons that folks are dissatisfied, because they're not getting these things from their employees. And where they are, they're staying and they're succeeding. They thrive on learning and growing and want to give back to the organization development that they've been looking for. The stay interview process is interesting, and for those who aren't familiar, it's really just knowing where your people stand today while they're with us, asking them, why do you stay? Asking them, what would take you away from us? And understanding and then acting on those answers to the question. It's not a replacement for exit interviews by any means, but exit interviews are sort of a post-mortem after the fact. Not much that you can do to correct. You can learn from it for sure, but the stay interview is going to give you something actionable and current. You want to monitor and measure your employee upward and lateral movement and success rate. Are people moving up? Are people taking lateral moves to enhance their career? And are we acknowledging that and recognizing that? Are we encouraging that? As Carly mentioned earlier, not everybody wants to be the CEO. In fact, some want to stay where they are and just do the best job they can. But there are others who have a different outlook and they want to move the company, and we need to keep track of those folks and how we're doing. And lastly, understand your employees' readiness and willingness to advance their careers through your succession planning process. We mentioned succession planning in part one, but truly, if you keep a succession planning process in place, you'll have a lot of answers to the questions, and you'll know who's ready, who's interested, who's willing, when they're ready, and all of those things, so that you can build the career development program for them, even customize it to them.
Yeah, and taking that a step further, how is the leadership over those teams? Do strong or weak leaders correlate to the trends you're seeing around this? For example, is their movement in a department stagnant and not a lot of people are growing and getting promoted? If it's stagnant, are there development opportunities in terms of leadership and interpersonal skill training for that leader in particular?
All right, we promised metrics for each of these strategies. Things to keep track of and be aware of are your average turnover within related to promotions or transfers. Are you moving more people through the organization or bringing more in? Outside hires are fine, of course, but if your philosophy is promote from within, then let's make sure we're going there first, whether it's for a promotion or a lateral transfer for career development. Know your average tenure of your employees. How long have people been with you? Have they been with you over 20 years, like at Cisco? Or do we have a little lower number with more churn? The average tenure right now is about 3 to 5 years. That's come down a lot in the last 10 years. In fact, the specific number I read was 4.6. So if you take 4.6, where are your people in relation to that average? Are you better than average, or less than average, or just average? But you should know. And the positions filled versus open positions, what we're referring to there is when you do have an opening, do you fill it? And if you fill it, do you fill it from within, or do you go outside? And are you making those decisions strategically, remembering career development and the importance to your people, and then the advantages of hiring from outside at time to time as well? Last, look at your turnover rates. Break it down. Don't just take the big number. Take it down to the voluntary turnover. Those are people that are deciding to leave the company. What's driving that? Involuntary turnover, I'm sure there's going to be cause and performance and those sorts of things. But if you peel it back a little bit, maybe there's a leader who needs some coaching and training on how to coach people up versus just get rid of them. It's important too to look at your high performers and where we are with them and how we're doing in retaining them. If you look at the average numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they tell us that 57.3% is the average turnover in the country. Now remember, that takes into account retail. I used to work in convenience stores. Our turnover was 121%, but that's not everywhere. The number drops to 25% when you look at voluntary turnover. Still, it's high, and we need to understand what's creating that voluntary turnover, people deciding to leave. The number changes to 29% when considering only the involuntary turnover. Talked a little bit about that a second ago. And when you look at high performers, there's only 3% turnover there. So most of them are staying with us, but you need to be aware of what your turnover does break down too.
Definitely. And, Paul talks about breaking that turnover down into those 3 different buckets. I challenge you to break it down even further. What is the actual term reason for that? So let's look at voluntary, for example. Are they leaving for a growth opportunity? Are they leaving for more money? Is it a relocation that you just couldn't support if they wanted to move out of state where you're currently doing business? Had you conducted a stay interview, could you have known and prevented it ahead of time? So let's say you see a trend where people are voluntarily leaving for more money and they're taking that same type of lateral position somewhere else, but getting more money to do the job that they're currently doing. My question to you as a leader in your organization or the executive part of the executive team of your organization, have you conducted a compensation benchmarking for your organization recently? Maybe it's time to look at that, in terms of the geographic location, the industry, and the current market rates. And a little shameless plug here, Paul or I can help you do that. So if you're needing a full company compensation review, call us. We're more than happy to help.
Yes, we are. Some pro tips on employee career development. First, engage your people through in-person connection. And I know remote work has kind of become a reality. And so it's difficult, but it's not impossible. If you make time and you make the connection and you plan it, it can be done almost as well as in person. But every chance you get, it should be personal. It should be in person if you have the opportunity. Make it as connected as you can. Recognize when people are struggling. And it could be personal or professional, but recognize when they're not operating at full steam and ask them what's going on. How can I help? And they may tell you, you know what, I'm ready for something else here. Well, if you wouldn't know, and you might lose them. So recognize when people are struggling, and don't forget to recognize when people are excelling as well. I mean, let's reward that activity. Some people say, "Oh, I'm just doing my job," but no, you're doing more than that, and it ought to be recognized. You can get feedback from every level of the company, of the organization, and you should use that. And specifically regarding career development, are people aware that you have that opportunity? Are people engaging in it? Are leaders and managers encouraging their people to get involved? So look for feedback on how you are doing as a leader in your career development plan. Talked about turnover, so know and track the reasons for voluntary, involuntary, and high performer turnover. Dig into it, get to know a little bit more. Stay interviews, exit interviews, all those will help. So to summarize, Carly and I have offered you up 2 strategies for retention. Now that the people are on board, we want to bring them in and keep them in through ensuring a culture fit as we bring them in and as we embrace them and embed them in the culture. And then within that culture should be an opportunity for career development. This is what they are telling us that they need. These 2 things are at the top of the list. We're really happy to share this information with you, and hope that you got out of it what we put into it. Our final webinar is coming up. That's going to be Rejuvenate Your Total Compensation Package, as we promised. And that'll be on Wednesday, September 28th. See you at noon.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time today. We really hope that you'll join us for our 3rd and final part of this webinar series. Now we're going to answer your questions. So as a reminder, if you have not yet put yours in, please put them in the Q&A section of the webinar. Jumping right in, one of the questions we got, can you advise on some behavioral type interview questions so you can gauge culture fit? Great question. I think you could do it two different ways. You could do an open-ended approach or basing the questions off your core values. So what I mean by an open-ended approach, you would ask them questions that they would reflect on about previous employment, such as, how would you describe the company culture at your last job? Or were you comfortable working in that environment? Why or why not? How would you describe the ideal corporate culture? Questions like that are open-ended. And then the core value approach. So for example, if collaboration is a huge part of your workplace culture, asking questions around that, like what makes you a great team player? Or would you rather work alone or with a team? Next question, Paul, what are some best practices for employee career development plans?
Some of the things you want to consider when you're building this plan is, first of all, it should support your business goals. So whatever you're attempting to do should be with an eye towards supporting the business and its growth. You want to understand what your employees' motivation is for developing their career, get to know them, get to know what their desires are as in terms of their career. There should be some accountability built in, performance management and deadlines, those sorts of things should be part of the career development plan. You want to acknowledge achievements throughout the process, recognize those. It should be an easy process too. It shouldn't be difficult for someone to access a career development plan or a coach in their leader. It needs to be communicated well and frequently so that people are aware as new hires come in, and for the tenured employees too, to remind them that you do have this process available and it's a benefit of working at your company. You can make sure that your career development plans integrate with your other processes. I just mentioned performance management, but there's also succession planning, recruiting and staffing, compensation, all those do play a part in your development plans. And one of the most important, maybe I should have started with this, is to get some executive buy-in and support of the program and have them be the cheerleaders for a career with your company. Thanks for the question.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Next one, how would we build a company culture? That's a great question. I believe that the framework needs to start at the top, meaning the executive level. So what is the mission or vision, core values of the organization? Then deciding what your ideal company culture looks like, how it aligns to that mission, vision, values, and then compare the ideal company culture to the existing one. It's important that you ask employees for input and also create opportunities for employees to build relationships across the organization and not in their silos. I think that's a good starting point. Next question, Paul. What's a good source of gathering more information on how to conduct stay interviews?
Oh, great question. I think stay interviews are something that are very important. And from my experience, when I was looking into this, and it was a while back, I went to SHRM, Society for Human Resources Management, and looked through the resources. They have this great book. It's a little guide on how to do it. It's got all the questions you want to ask, how to implement the program, how to get managers involved and trained to be good stay interviewers. So I'd start there. I'm sure there's other resources, but that one really got me started when I started a stay program at one of my former employers. Thanks for asking.
And then another question, we probably have time for one or two more. I want to be mindful of the 45-minute mark we have, but how do you remain competitive as a company when you have a budget and can't compete with 10 to 25% competing offers for your talent? That's a real struggle that we see day in and day out. I think it's a perfect segue to encourage you to attend our third webinar where we talk about the total compensation package, where we're focusing on the whole total rewards offering. So being creative in that space, I would say, would be a way that you can kind of combat the higher offers where you might not have the budget for. So definitely encourage you to attend our part 3 where we talk about the total compensation package, not just base salary. I think we have time for one more question. Paul, one of our attendees says, I agree with everything you're discussing and have followed this in other organizations. I'm struggling a bit in how to follow some of these initiatives in a company of less than 20 employees. As an example, not a lot of opportunities to move into other roles. What are your thoughts?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. It sounds like this is directed at the career development area. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the size of the company is going to make a difference, and the opportunities for advancement are going to make a difference. But career development doesn't necessarily mean advancement all the time. It means developing the person in their role and preparing them for the next opportunity at the company. If those opportunities are limited, then I think it becomes incumbent on us to ensure that we are acknowledging the person's success, challenging them, raising the bar where we can, and preparing them for the next role. It may not come next year. And I know some people think that once they get their first job, they should be advanced in the next 6 months to a year. Maybe, but probably not realistic. So I think if your culture is that we're a smaller organization, we value all of our employees, but not everybody can be the next VP or CEO, that should help you to alleviate the stress you're feeling about not having those opportunities that a larger company might have. Really goes back to your culture and what you can do to help develop their skills, regardless of the role, and prepare them for the next role as it does come.
Awesome.
Hope that helped.
There are a few more questions that unfortunately we don't have time for today, but we will absolutely respond to you directly with the answers or our opinions on some of those questions that were posed today.
Yes, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you for your time. We really enjoyed doing these webinars, and we have another one coming up at the end of September. I think Carly just said this, but questions that weren't answered will be answered. This is being recorded, so we'll provide a recording of the webinar. And again, thank you so much. We're glad you're here.
Thanks.